Tonight is a really special night. We're here to celebrate the launch of the anthology Go Home, a project that has spanned more than 2 years and represented a really incredible partnership between the Asian American Writers Workshop and the Feminist Press. Go Home began as an idea that the anthology's editor, Rowan Hisayo Buchanan, had as an AAWW Margins Fellow in 2015. In the final months of her fellowship year, Rowan had secured an agent and a book deal for her debut novel, Harmless Like You. And in those months, she and I began talking about AAWW's interest in getting back into book projects. Rowan's vision for the anthology arose as a response to the racist slur, "Go Home," that may be familiar to many of you in this room. To so many writers in this collection, the insult also stirs up the impossibility of returning to a geographical home or the frailty of home itself. In a time of increasing xenophobia, in a time of continuing wars the US supports abroad that have pushed many out of their homes, we want to bring together visions of home that push up against tired assumptions about belonging. I think of Go Home really as an outgrowth of our fellowship program to support emerging Asian American writers. From Rowan's vision and editorship to the anthology's contributors, which include former fellows Wo Chan, Muno Gurang, and Chaya Babu. And the AAWW has been a home to emerging writers for over 25 years. Many of the contributors to Go Home are writers we've been supporting since our early days, writers who've been central to our programming and work ever since. And we continue to support a new generation of emerging writers through our fellowships and programming and publications. We've been really thrilled with the attention Go Home has received in the past few weeks, from excerpts in The New Yorker, Tin House, The Rumpus, there's coverage in LitHub, more coming soon in Book Forum, these glowing blurbs from Asian American writers we know and love, like Ocean Vuong, Ruth Ozeki, Jenny Zhang, and Monica Yoon. Plus, Go Home is going on tour. If you'd like to continue this journey, you can join us tomorrow night at Greenlight Bookstore in Fort Greene. You can check out our website for more Go Home launch events across the country, in Boston on Wednesday, in San Francisco on Sunday, and an event in LA next Tuesday. So definitely let your friends know in other cities. None of this would have been possible without the Feminist Press, who have believed in this project from day one and been an incredible partner throughout this journey. In particular, really want to thank Jisoo Kim at the Feminist Press, who has worked tirelessly to make this book a reality and been just a delight to work with. We are also so thankful to Rowan for editing this anthology, for all of her energy and care the whole way through, and we just hope that she keeps coming back to AAWW. And also, we're so grateful for all of the writers who have contributed to Go Home, for sharing their work with us, for sharing their visions of home with us, to all those who submitted to our open call, to Viet Thanh Nguyen for writing our foreword. Also a huge thanks to everyone on the AAWW staff, our former art director, Britt Goodis, who designed the cover, assistant editor Yasmin Majid, who helped review submissions for our Open City Call and has been cheering on and supporting this project from the beginning, to Sophia Hussein and Tiffany Lee, our event staff, along with our events interns working the event tonight. Thank you so much for organizing this. And Ken Chan, our executive director, for his encouragement. I also want to thank some supporters, and I'll make this quick so we can get to the program, who have really helped make our fellowships and programming possible. A big thank you to the Nathan Cummings Foundation, CERDNA, the New York Community Trust, the Jerome Foundation, the CJ Huang Foundation, Axe Houghton, and the Nielsen Foundation. Okay, so we're going to get this started. Tonight we have an incredible lineup: Gina Apostol, Chaya Babu, Alexander Chee, Karissa Chen, and Wendy Shu. And first, I am honored to welcome onto the stage Rowan Hisayo Buchanan, who will get us started and will be moderating the conversation after our readings. Rowan is the editor of Go Home and the author of the novel Harmless Like You. You can also find her work on Granta, Guernica, The Guardian, Apogee, and The White Review. And she's also a talented visual artist. If you didn't know, you can find some of her graphic pieces on the margins. Rowan was a 2015 AAWW Margins Fellow. Let's give it up for Rowan. Thank you.
Wow, there are a lot of you here. I'm very happy. So that was probably that was a very beautiful introduction to the anthology, and I don't want to ramble on and add too much to it. So I thought I would read a little bit of the editor's note, because it's one of the privileges as an editor. You get to say what on earth you were thinking when you put a book together. In Japanese, there is a specific verb for traveling homeward. Going or coming home is its own enterprise, distinct from traveling to any other destination. There is something so particular about a journey made toward home. But what does it mean to go home? My friend and I were standing in line for the new museum. It was a lovely New York day, and the light was low and violet. People ahead of us were eating food out of little paper boxes. Then we heard it. Go home! The man shouting at us was wearing a black plastic jacket, and his beard was a blonde-white scroll. He slowed his pace only for the moment it took for the hatred to spill out of his mouth. The insult seemed so weak, like movie villain stock dialogue. It was almost ridiculous, because of the sheer impossibility of it. My friend, let's call him T, grew up in Michigan. His family now lives in North Carolina. He was born in the north of China. The last time he went back to his birthplace, he was 8 years old. We were waiting for our friend M to join us. She's half Japanese, half Sicilian, and grew up in the Midwest. I was born in London. My grandfather was born in Tokyo, and my grandmother in Shanghai. My mother was born on the Upper West Side of New York. My father's side is a European hodgepodge. Where is that Japanese, Chinese, Scottish, English, American... where is it that Japanese, Chinese, Scottish, English, American people come from? My idea of home is a verb. Home is a straining toward belonging. For me, the feeling of wanting to go home is home. For others, home is a place they want to escape, a place that doesn't exist, a place that only exists in time, a place that exists in the breath of a parent or the mouth of a lover. For some, home is geographical, but they cannot return because of political, financial, or personal reasons. Others are seen as foreigners in their chosen homes. In my conversations with the Asian American Writers' Workshop and the Feminist Press, we agreed we wanted to share many different visions of home. I began compiling this anthology after I moved from the United States to the United Kingdom. At the moment, both countries seem to be becoming less and less united. Xenophobic rhetoric gushes from political podiums. The ideal home they describe has locked doors, not letting anyone in or out. They want to decide who belongs where, but I have seen a pushback. Writers are amplifying each other's cries to kindness, to empathy, and to understanding. I hope this anthology can participate in that work. Thank you. So, the writer I want to introduce is Alexander Chee. He's the author of the bestseller Queen of the Night, and his debut novel Edinburgh is very precious to me because when I was living in the Midwest and actually feeling very, very alone, a friend of mine, who herself was an intern at the Asian American Writers' Workshop once, sent me Edinburgh, and she just said, "Oh, I think this book would speak to you." And I felt so known in that by her, but that she would know that that was the book I needed, and it was the book I needed. And I felt like just like that apartment I was living in with the icicles outside felt slightly more like home with that book in it. So he starts this anthology, and it means a lot to me. So I will let him take it away.
Thank you, Rowan. I was just running through some of the memories of this place. I even had an office here at one point. Is it too short? There we go. That's better. I'm so tall. But also I was thinking about how when people yell that insult, they felt alienated first. More and more, when they yell that insult, it tells me that they're in my country. This is called Release. In the fall of 1996, I moved into a sublet, a room in an apartment in the West Village of New York at the corner of Greenwich Avenue and 7th. The apartment belonged to someone I'd met through a friend. The rent was very cheap, and I had always wanted to live in the West Village. I had my eye on West 11th Street, and this was close. The apartment was essentially a narrow hallway, and my room was a small room, a little bigger than my bed. There was a bathroom, a kitchen, and his room, which was also the living room, and it had a door I couldn't go beyond if it was closed, as it meant my roommate was working, which is to say, giving a man a massage with the understanding that at the end, he'd get release. Release? I asked when he first said it. A hand job, he answered. I nodded, and then he nodded too, and laughed. Release always struck me as a strangely hygienic term for it. I imagined men supplicant on the long table, afraid they might not be allowed of whatever the prison was of their lives, leaping into the air afterward, maybe even capable of flight. My roommate was tall, handsome, a former model, Amerasian like me, Dutch and Japanese, and he had a beautiful sleeve tattoo on his arm of a Japanese dragon, like a character out of a comic book. He was like a taller, prettier version of me, the older cousin I'd never had, the spitting image of Crying Freeman from the manga of the same name, about a Japanese assassin for the Chinese mafia. And while I think I sometimes may have mentioned the comics, I don't remember. I do remember how sometimes I had the uncanny feeling of having entered one, as if I'd loved it so much it had come true, especially when he strode across the room, shirtless, a beautiful tattoo glowing on his skin. He was smart and funny and had literary aspirations that we sometimes talked about on the nights we drank wine late into the night in his room, which was also the living room. I was happy for a while there. I could count on one hand the number of Hapa gay men I'd met back then, and of those, even fewer of them were literary. Each time I met one, it was like we were from a homeland that had never existed, but that if we collected enough of each other, maybe it would. But we never said this, or I never did. It was just something I felt. I liked being like him, and I wanted to be more like him, to be as sultry, as bitter, as funny in the same way, as beautiful. When I found out he wanted to be a writer, it made me proud somehow. As much as I wanted to be like him, it surprised me to learn he wanted to be a little like me. At times while drinking wine, he would confess things to me. The first confession was that he was terribly disfigured. A motorcycle accident in Los Angeles, he assured me, had ended his career as a model and actor. I couldn't tell. His face and body were both still beautiful, as far as I could see, and I could see no scars. When I told him, he laughed bitterly. You can see it in pictures, he assured me. When he showed me photos of him as he had been, I scrutinized them carefully, but he looked the same. A really good plastic surgeon was at the emergency room, he then said. You know, thank God it was LA. Yes, I remember thinking, thank LA too. Next he told me he had steroids he took to stay thin without working out, as he hated working out. Pills he got from a doctor he saw in the room who paid him in prescriptions. Soon the doctor was revealed to be the doctor who had worked on his face. Then I learned that the friend who had recommended me to him was also a client. There was a story he was telling me in installments, but the installments felt like windows that could not show the whole story. The real story was in what he did and did not say. The kitchen was right before his room. I never heard much when it was happening, and he kept the door closed if I was home while he had clients. As a courtesy to him, I tried not to be there, though, and as the neighborhood was full of bookstores, it was easy. His work didn't bother me. It was a little funny to me, like living in the front room of a brothel, in the most boring way. He was blithe about his work, as if it didn't matter that he did this kind of work, as if it were only funny that he did this. He liked to make jokes. But I soon understood in his mind the accident had foreclosed on a more lucrative modeling and acting career, and this work was what he could do now, the one way he could still make money off of his looks. Most of the time he maintained an air of devilishness, but here and there, rage appeared, only in the eyes of the very still, very beautiful, allegedly destroyed face. Every so often he would take the photos of himself from before the accident and show them to me in something like a ritual, asking me again to see the difference that I could not see. Gradually I understood it didn't matter that he was still beautiful to him, not if every time he looked in the mirror he saw a stranger, someone who was going to fail him in his future, a replacement left behind by the accident. He brought home a dog a few months after I moved in, a short, squat, blonde mutt, part corgi, part terrier of some kind. Golden, seemingly placid, going blind. I don't remember why, but soon after he said he didn't want the dog anymore. By then the dog and I had grown attached to each other, and so I said I'd take the dog. The dog woke from a nap on my bed one afternoon and snarled once before it leapt at me, attaching itself to my cheek, biting deep. I grabbed its throat reflexively, and it let go. At the nearby St. Vincent's Hospital, I waited in the emergency room to be told the wounds were puncture wounds and could not be sewn, only treated with salves and bandaged. So I was treated, given oral antibiotics and painkillers, an enormous bandage for my left cheek, and then I was released. When I got home, my roommate had had it destroyed. He showed me the papers for the dog, which I had not seen before the accident, with the word unadoptable stamped across them. I didn't stay too much longer after that. I'd never spoken to him again. I saw something he wrote in the Village Voice once, but now only his face remains in my memory. Even his name is lost to me. The only other way I remember him is in my face. I can tell when it's going to rain now. I feel it in the scar like a thumb pressing on the bone. When I do, I remember the attending physician saying, "It's good you caught him at the throat. This could have been much worse." Then he explained that if you're ever being attacked by a dog, to try to catch and pull their front legs apart. This splits the breastbone open, incapacitating them, though it seems to me to bring the dog's face unacceptably close. I'm sure I could never do it, and I'm happy I've never had to try. But I also no longer, despite my love of dogs, let them lick my face. My face is a stranger to me now, even all these years later. I tell people the story and ask if they can see the difference, and everyone says, "You can't tell." But I can. I never used to believe him about his face, but I do now. If I ever see him again, I'll tell him. Thank you. I'm going to introduce Chaya Babu, who will come up and read next. She is a Brooklyn-based writer, journalist, educator, and organizer. She was a 2016 BuzzFeed Emerging Writers Fellow and a 2015 Open City Fellow with the Asian American Writers Workshop, and her writing has also appeared in The Margins, Racialicious, The Feminist Wire, The Wall Street Journal, The Sunday Guardian, India Abroad, and elsewhere. Babu is currently pursuing her MFA in writing at Pratt Institute, and she's also editor-at-large at the Brooklyn Quarterly and a teaching artist with Community Word Project. Please welcome Chaya Babu.
Is that good? Okay. I'm also going to take a picture of everyone because I like to do that. And the first time I ever read anything out loud was here, and I did this. So, hi, yay, smile. Okay. Thank you, Alex. So I'm going to be reading from a piece called The Cul-De-Sac. In kindergarten, I'd get off the minibus at noon and ring the doorbell at the mudroom. Every day, the housekeeper would answer the door. This was the woman my parents had hired to keep the house spotless while my mother wasn't there to wipe our fingerprints off the cream-colored Formica cupboards. Every day I'd ask, "Is my mom home?" "She's at work," she'd say. We'd stand like this for a moment, she in the doorframe, I a step down and still outside on the porous concrete stoop, clutching the straps of my backpack as if I might turn on my Converse high-top heels if her answer was no. Instead, I'd look up at her, my face at her hip, both of us with blank stares. She'd shuffle aside so I could enter. I spent a lot of time across the cul-de-sac at Jessica Meyer's. Her house was a mirror image of ours, contemporary 80s angular monstrosities that nobody wants now. Her mom stayed home during the day. It wasn't until years later that I realized how much time it must have taken Cheryl to coat her lashes in that lacquer and feather her big blonde hair. And to go where? Her soft leather handbag, large enough to fit my mother's purse, as well as the hard otoscope case she pulled down from the closet whenever I had a sore throat, had a rabbit's foot dangling from the zipper and sat on the kitchen table next to a ring of keys. Lots of keys that jingled in tandem with the clack of her stilettos and opened who knows what, but there were so many that I inherently assumed her life was as large as the things she carried. After school, Cheryl drove us places if we had places to go. In the car, she listened to cassette tapes of Black Box and Technotronic and Janet Jackson. Jessica would dance in her seat to it. Pump the jam, pump it up, while your feet are stomping. Mouthing the words, her torso arching forward and back in sharp staccato movements to the beat, her seatbelt pulling taut with the curve of her body. Together they went into the city some days to take classes at Broadway Dance Center. Chaya, her mom called to me in the back seat one day, glancing briefly in the rearview mirror through her gigantic tortoiseshell sunglasses. "What kind of music do you like, sweetie?" I said, trailing off. I didn't know. I was 6. Through the Myers, I learned the ways I was wrong. In their yard, which Jessica's dad, Jack, tended to routinely, we ran through sprinklers and ate hard pretzels and drank pink lemonade with ice cubes clinking against the glasses. They ate salad before their meals and put salt and pepper on everything. I had never seen salad tongs before. The floors in their living room were silver gray tile as opposed to warm cedar covered with oriental rugs like in our house, and the walls in Jessica's room were pale lavender. On her tufted carpet that reminded me of pussy willow catkins, her mother would blow-dry Jessica's hair after giving her a bath until it was fluffy, a halo of spun gold cotton candy. We were small and quiet compared to them. My father didn't take care of the lawn, which browned in patches and had haphazard sproutings of weeds. His hands didn't hold baseballs or wrenches or dirt. Day and night they scalpeled and sutured the flimsy walls of veins and sketched the vessels of the human body on sheets of white paper on Saturdays. He came home late, too late to tickle or joke. He sometimes read us Sneetches in bed before sitting cross-legged with a tiny tattered prayer book in his dark-lined palms. Jack got home by dinner, beaming, smelling like cigar smoke and suede from the factory he owned. He scooped up Bradley, still a baby, and roared, "Who's my boy?" He built them a wooden swing set, but also helped my sister Rekha with her math homework, though I'm not sure she needed it. Rekha, who basked in the glory of the Myers' easy sophistication, who joined jazz classes with recitals for which she wore sparkly midriff-bearing spandex, who liked Donnie Wahlberg just like Jessica, and so the two of them shared that, my crush on Joey McIntyre signifying some obvious lack on my part. She was my big sister, and yet somehow Jessica took her. She declared, "Rekha is my sister," and nobody protested, not even the parents. They just laughed. Despite the fact that Jessica and I swirled globs of paint on opposite sides of the easel at school to make identical puke-brown masterpieces, and ran across the asphalt circle to each other the second the minibus drove off on most days. In the mornings, she insisted on holding Rekha's hand. I walked alone. When I soon discovered I was suited to neither gymnastics nor ballet, or rather, I sensed something erroneous about my brown body in a leotard, I excused myself from the carpool. My afternoons were passed dwarfed in the Briarcliff house, its high sloping ceilings and faint echo through the hollowness of the green carpet room. I watched Ghostwriter on the television from my parents' bed, sat in awe as my grandfather built deft inventions out of discarded wires in the basement, or retreated into the pages of R.L. Stein books on the dense mauve cut pile in my room. To this, my mother said, "It's not that you're not talented, you're just lazy." Still, if it was a bone-cutting New York winter, the kind that had the kids from all 6 houses walking backward to the bus stop in the mornings to keep the wind from whipping at our small faces, or if it was raining particularly hard, Cheryl would pick us up at the mouth of the Cul-De-Sac where we got dropped off starting in 1st grade. We'd scurry out of the big bus's accordion doors and see the boxy white Volvo parked there with the smack of its black wipers in the wetness, waiting, just yards from the safe, dry havens of actual shelter. Once I just stood there, only for a minute, but nonetheless. Rekha and Jessica tumbled into the car next to a bundled-up Bradley, slick, heaving, relieved to be under cover at last. "Well, Chaya, are you getting in or what?" Cheryl asked, peering out with raised brows. The storm poured around me, splashing onto the plush floor of the Volvo. "You can stand here, but we're gonna go." Drenched, I had the lurking worry she might not make the 3-second detour along the arc of the cul-de-sac to take me home. Through some odd stroke of fate, Cheryl's last name was Babu. Romanian roots, apparently. For years, Jessica obsessed over this fact, staking her claim to some sort of meaningful connection to us, or, more accurately, to Reka, that ran deeper than the cul-de-sac. We're family, is what the adults would say. And since Bradley wandered through our front door frequently to have my mom feed him a bowl of cereal, and I sat with the Myers at the town pool in the summers drinking Capri Sun from their cooler, it's not so much that I found this family a false construct as much as I could not fathom my belonging to it. By fourth grade, even these ties felt tenuous, at least as far as Jessica and I were concerned. We were not friends. Things had started to matter, like fair, wispy hair and whether your clothes were picked by certain kinds of moms. Mine wore white coats, and if something more formal was called for, saris that smelled like suitcases. No matter the occasion, her long ponytail, tied loosely at the nape of her neck, was held in place by clear, colorful balls that only kids should wear. Walking to our respective homes one day after getting off the bus, Jessica quipped, hardly looking at me, "You're wearing that?" As if we were getting dressed to go somewhere and I was weighing outfit options versus it being the end of a school day. This caught me off guard. Yes, I was awkward and unpopular, and she had succeeded from the get-go in securing the affection of a cool older girl who just happened to be my sister. But this, it was something else. I wondered how it had grown. I knew the seeds were planted early, nurtured by my silence and the shame they all heaped upon me for my coarse, unruly mane, ashy knees darker than Reka's, a unibrow, and a dusky shadow over my top lip even when I should have been too little to be ugly. But when had it borne such fruit? I had on magenta jeans and a white button-down shirt with little cowboy boots sewn along the placket. And what I thought was a clever move, I wore my own brown cowboy boots with a stitched design on the toe to match. Under Jessica's gaze, I wished I had chosen something else. What, I couldn't be sure, just not the Western-themed getup. She still ended up at our house sometimes. "Reka, will you do my makeup?" she asked one night. They crouched together in the narrow alcove near the door of the bedroom that Reka and I shared, just enough light reaching the full-length mirror through their huddled bodies. "Oh my God, I'm gonna make your blue eyes look so pretty," Reka said. Jessica sat with her legs folded beneath her, frozen, looking up and her mouth stretched downward as if her cheekbones were in the way. Reka, 13 then, tried to draw a line along or through Jessica's bottom lashes in a way that I thought must be painful. In this moment, the redness of the area immediately around her eyes reminded me of how raw her mother looked in the few fleeting instances I had caught her barefaced in the morning, once with what I swore was a bandage over her nose and the surrounding area puffed in purple. When Reka finished with the pencil, she took out the mascara. I was used to this part, but it got me every time. "You have such long eyelashes," she told Jessica. "They're like perfect." Reka glanced at me so quickly it was almost imperceptible. But she did, and I knew why. Jessica might have been the pretty Maureen Peel to my position as the Cul-De-Sac's Pacola Breedlove, with her shimmering hair and even the way her top lip didn't fully exist or touch the bottom one if she didn't make a concerted effort. The opposite of what my sister called my big black people lips. But she did not have eyelashes. They were short, sparse, and the same color as her skin. I was the hairy one. And along with this gross misfortune, I was also the one with the lashes, ones you could actually see. But I swallowed the tide of bile that welled in my core. Even I wasn't stupid enough to believe that such a concession was grantable. Thank you. I'm going to introduce Wendy Shu. Wendy is the author of Phrasis, winner of the 2016 Autoline Prize, and You Are Not Dead. The recipient of a Ruth Lilly Fellowship, her work has appeared in the Best American Poetry, Boston Review, Poetry, A Public Space, and widely elsewhere. Born in Shandong, China, she lives in New York City and serves as poetry editor for Hyperallergic.
I'm medium tall, so what do I do? It's this part. Okay, how's that? Great. Hi, everyone. This is so nice. There's so many of you. So I'm really honored to have one poem in the anthology, and I was thinking earlier that it takes like 30 seconds to read, so I'm not going to read it to you 20 times to complete, 5 to 7 minutes. So I'm going to read a couple of other newer poems that are as Rowan put so well in the introduction, I think thinks about these ideas of home, and then I'll finish with that anthology poem. So, writing home. Bending into the screen, I feel crystalline speech move throughout me. An absence declares its blunt self. I can't believe the extent of my luck, heard twice like violets in a bath of lukewarm water. The city was my father's, though none of its sweetness appears here living before you. A strong instrument, a blowing on the hands and neck, a curtain almost open. I inherited a stiff collar sewn against loveliness, where once we must have walked freely into the city square and gathered there like an intention. Tulips bloomed on my mother's cheek. I felt a heavenly peace. Here, the marker you might have waited for. Ancient dough, rolled and fried. These days, the lyric's sentiment floats away from me like a river someone forgets to bless. Memory, to the dirt path opening again in a dream. I have not been back for so many years. I walk the distance in my mind, the margins flowing by like so much foreign water. Looking at my father. My father's Chinese, that's important. I'm Chinese too. I want to make sure you get the poem. Look. Looking at my father. It's the inside which comes out as I contemplate him there half in sunlight, weeding diligently a Midwestern lawn. On my persons, I have only notes and a drying pen, the memory of onion blossoms scenting in a window. Reflection is my native medium. I am never arriving, only speaking briefly on material conditions between myself and others. My country inoculates me lovingly over time. My country grasps me like desire. I will show you my credentials, which is to say my vivid description if you ask. Here we are, my father and I, never hostile, a small offering. Pointless cut flowers appear on the kitchen table when one finally arrives into disposable income. Still possible. Am I living? Do I accept revision as my Godhead and Savior? I do and I am. And in the name of my Chinese father now dragging the tools back inside, brow shining but always a grin, faithless except to protect whatever I still have time to become. Amen. Interim Poetics. I walked there guilty by tongue, but not by mind. The water was breaking on a soft green rock. The rock was breaking underfoot despite a lack of intention. My works contained no genius, only an educated bouquet of ideas. White ones, sand ones, some almost blue. An image I returned to, deep green tendrils, coarse salt. By day, I moved easily enough through the offices of disappointing money. Uninterrupted, nobody stopped to ask for any music. I knew my family's faces by pinkness and language comprehension. Something like a fond electricity was happening inside of me. I felt I could lay there forever on the tarmac by the sea. A three-legged chair, a clock, a door opening in the surf, my eye passed over without judgment or apprehension. A feeling entered quietly through the four walls of my murky inheritance, just lost in the technicolor thought of it all. a brush stroking to the left, a government whistling as it hurts. I receive its washed up objects and contain not a single word. It's called Praxis. I had put down in writing my fear of the war. I too pined for pastoral description. The blue of the water was the blue of the world. Newness does not, for me, equal satisfaction. A finite number of concentric rings I push out into space. A tedious fabric moving through time without malice. An act of oration, rebellion, inventory, fantasy. The sound of the earth closing its one good eye over me. Imagine, you reach out towards the margin's white hand. You do what your palms want and are clean. When you lay down your thorns, you will be done. You do not take up arms against anyone. And this is the ecstasy of time. I begin in texture approaching green, a pause, my condition repellent to form. Pause again and live with the history of me, spilling over. When you stand beneath the sentence concentric, you disorient neon speech. Do you hear me calling from across ecstatic silence? Along the deep cut trespassed, along linear expression, I touch my family. A condition of light pours from a loss in the door. A beetle roams the page at night, it touches the inky folds of time. I hear ancient speech, roses laid down white upon the sentence, a posture, a taste like humming a name. And I'm going to finish with a poem that's in the anthology. The place where I live is different because I live there. On Friday, all anybody did was talk about waffles. When other people want a thing, I want it a lot too. Other people wanted to save kittens from trees, while the trees maybe wanted some saving also from the dark sort of rain that fills up a gutter, that shook out some people from beds trying to be happy, that caused a train full of complicated ideas to stop near my house, which was great. I pay attention to things that push back. I muster up the energy to sit through very important presentations. One way to be amazed is to be less amazing and then look around. Don't ask any questions about waffle science. Believe that there was only ever one kitten whimpering in that tree, and so how great are you? Admire how things wait to push up through the earth until the earth is beautiful enough. I think about painting my house, then I think about other houses. Thank you. And I get to introduce Gina Apostol, our next reader. Gina Apostol's third novel, Gun Dealer's Daughter, won the 2013 PEN Open Book Award and was shortlisted for the 2014 William Sorian International Prize. Her first two novels, Bibliolepsy, I love that name, amazing, and The Revolution According to Raimundo Mata, both won the Juan C. Laya Prize for the novel, which is the Philippine National Book Award. Her essays and stories have appeared in the New York Times, Los Angeles Review of Books, Foreign Policy, Gettysburg Review, Massachusetts Review, and others. She lives here in New York City. Please welcome Gina Apostol.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. You all look absolutely beautiful. That is the trick of Asian American Writers Workshop. You know, everyone always looks absolutely gorgeous here. Um, I'll be reading from excerpts from a novel called Insurrecto. It's coming out in November. This is, I don't know where this is from in the novel. But anyway, chapter 22. Magsalin does not get it. Magsalin shakes her head. Starting a movie with a voiceover by a society photographer who discovers her soul amid butchery will turn off local viewers. Anti-imperialists are touchy people. And as a polite trigger warning, the device is risky. In a movie about a Philippine war, why use a 19th century Daisy Buchanan, some socialite photographer who, unlike the truthful shallowness of the Gatsby original, will turn out to have a bleeding heart? That idea is so 1970s, when politics mattered, and even the heiress Patty Hearst, had a cause. Or that journalist in Reds, the Diane Keaton character who nurses the Yankee commie John Reed back to life in the Warren Beatty epic. Sure, it is nice to have a woman's voice in a time of war, but does she need to be so white? Whatever. It is obvious that the upper-class WASP photographer, actually a mutated Ukrainian Jew, is a stand-in for the generic consumer being enticed to know the story. And that soundtrack, Magsalin hates it. It sticks in her head. We're caught in a trap, I can't walk out. Shove it up your nose. She has heard these songs, including the bovine, marginal declensions, the whoa, 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 all throughout her childhood. A sad trick, this pop track, that the soundtrack for the Filipino American War is stuffed with bloated, late Elvis, earworms of his crass decay, listened to over and over again in the benighted tropics, or at least among her mother's generation, disappoints her. Elvis is from her uncle's time. Magsalin has never liked the songs, though it surprises her now how all the tunes she thought were absolutely Filipino, like Are You Lonesome Tonight? An annoying kundiman, if she ever heard one, turned out to be Elvis, except My Way. My Way is Frank. To sing My Way, you are not allowed to deviate from the Frankish phrasings or you will die. I'll say this, it's true. There have been My Way killings. If you don't sing My Way the way Frank sings, you die. People have shot you in the Philippine karaoke bars. But Elvis has this phenomenal stature among local drunks, and no matter how anyone mangles his desperate songs, they always bring tears to someone's eyes. Turns out, the serenade songs, the kundiman that men used to sing to virgins in their gauzy camisas, looking out from copy shell windows and thatched roof trappings, nipa huts idealized as symbols of authenticity, of the genuine Filipino-ness of their lives, in the TV love dramas of the time, turns out, all the kundiman harana songs her uncles loved to sing were Elvis, or based on Elvis. To be honest, I really did think that they were all Elvis, I didn't know about Elvis. I thought they were all kundiman songs until like a few years ago, and then I put it in my novel. He was inescapable in her childhood, but at the time, Magsalin had no clue. She grew up innocently with her uncle's drinking bouts, in which the songs seemed to spring from the bamboo groves, and grown men sang pitch-perfect versions of creepy ballads while sopping up Bahalina Tuba, their homegrown wine. Even now, her uncles in Manila bring in fresh gallons of this wine from cargo ships that look as if they had known the days of Magellan. And in Manila, they have translated their provincial guitar fests into insomnia-inducing mechanical nights of karaoke. It strikes Magsalin that the congenital link between drunkenness and song in her uncles might be an ancient tumor, a fever of the islands beyond anyone's control, so that Elvis and Frank are daemons, or maybe cancers, forms of visceral necrosis, a genetic malady, and not necrotizing corporations. It was a shock when she arrived in America, and she recognized that the culture she had thought was hers to sneer at was, all along, not really. It was claimed by others. Worse, her own culture of the fermented coconuts and the demented singers was not visible at first in New York, except maybe in vagabond diesel from hot dog trucks that gave off the whiff of jeepney smog. But even that missed the necessary attachment of the smell of fish balls. The song, Sweet Caroline, was the Boston Red Sox song, not her Uncle Chusikil's signature anthem. No one, not even Chusikil's oldest brother, Chunemesio, clearly a better tenor, was allowed to sing Sweet Caroline. But to her confusion, it was also owned by this humongous sports arena of phenomenal passion in Boston. In America, she kept confronting these doubles. Repetitions of details from her homeland that have reverse or disjoint significance in this simultaneous place, as if parallel universes of Elvises and Neil Diamonds were a dark matter of the cosmos that eludes theorists of the world's design. That she has Elvis Presley in her bones, a secret, metastasizing thing, just as she has Nipa huts and the crazy graphics of jeepney designs, occurred to her as a blow. And once on a visit to Nashville, when all she heard in this museum she stumbled into, which contained only Elvis cars, was Elvis all day, all the time, the idea struck her, oh gee, what if Manila is necrotized in America too? Scar tissue so deeply hidden and traumatizing, no one needs to know about it. One is in the other, and the other is in one, she thought, feeling ill in Nashville, herself overdubbed, multiplied, intercut, and hyperlinked. But which is to be master, she wondered, feeling dizzy, about to fall. She also had too much bourbon. These realizations of différance comprised her surrender to her new world of signs. She does not mourn her dumb recognitions, though she curses the fact that it is her lot to note them. In short, Magsalan became interested in alternity to the misfortune of her friends in Queens, who hate to listen to her pontification at their historic ethnic dinners, in which, with exaggerated gestures as they pick up mounds of rice, they like to eat in peace with their hands. The alternative. Magsalan apologizes for the pun, but she has no willpower. She does not resist. Anyway, she proclaims to her peers at one of their utensil-deficient dinners, it is a thought that strikes her as she strokes a mangled piece of pork with her manicured pinky. Quote, everybody is messed up and occupied by others, even if you are not Filipino. We are all creatures of translation, parallel chapters repeating an universal void. Dead silence amid pig's blood and the dregs of cow marrow. Then they all go on clumsily scraping up their dinuguan and bulalo, for after all, none of them is any good at being indigenous out in Flushing. They order all of the wrong things for their homesick performance, this renegade act of eating without spoons, unquote. And it is my huge pleasure to be introducing Karissa Chen, whom I have hugged for 222 times already because we were at AWP yesterday. Karissa Chen is the author of the chapbook of Birds and Lovers. Her fiction and essays have been published in numerous publications, including Gulf Coast, Pen America, Guernica, and The Toast. She was the recipient of a Fulbright Fellowship to Taiwan and is a Kundiman and Buena Voices Fellow. She currently serves as the editor-in-chief of Hyphen Magazine and is fiction editor of The Rumpus. Please welcome Karissa.
Okay, that's good. Thanks so much to the Writers' Workshop. You know, like, this is one of the first places I came when I was a baby writer, probably now 12 years ago, 13 years ago, something like that. So it's really special to be here, and thanks for coming out. I'm going to read the beginning of a short story that's in this anthology called Blue Tears. If the communists swim ashore, they'll slit our throats in our sleep and cut off our ears. That's what some of the men say. The communist generals wear belts of ears around their waists, the cartilage and skin turned black, curling into themselves like dried fungus. Nobody sleeps on the beach, not even the areas where there are no mines. Nobody except me. I volunteer for all the night sentinel posts stationed in that little tower overlooking the sea. After my shift is over, instead of heading back to my bunk, I sleep out on the sand. I tell people it's because I like looking at the fading stars. My commander, Colonel Lee, never stops me. You're a lunatic, he says, but a brave one. I like that. Quemoy, Jingmen, Golden Gate, island of shit. I've been stationed here 3 months and have yet to find the gold the name speaks of. When I slept in the bunks, I never slept well. The humid air hung around me beneath the useless mosquito nets. The fucking vampire still needled around my ears. The hollow whooping call of some native bird kept me from ever completely resting. Now when I sleep outside, those same birds shit on me. The sun darkens the skin around the shit so that I walk around permanently with pale shit-stain shaped blotches on my arms. It's better with the sea breeze, though. At least the air moves out here. Out on this island, there's jungle and dust and sea and barracks and an omnipresent blanket of heat and near nothing else. An unfriendly island meant to keep out unfriendly people, one of the lieutenants always jokes. I know when he says people, he means the communists, who fire on us sporadically. But by the way some of the local Jiminese will meet my eyes when I walk through town, I can't help but think they might believe it means us. The sea is wide and gray and smells of brine, just like it did back home. I can't tell how deep the water goes, but on the clearest of days, I can see the shoreline of Amoy, the city of my birth. It's the closest I've been to home since I left over 4 years ago. If I squint, I think I can see people going about their day. I think I can see folks haggling at market, buying vegetables, stopping to gossip with neighbors. I wonder if there's anyone I know. I wonder if I squint hard enough, I'll be able to see the road that would take me back to our village, back to my home. It's 2 kilometers from where I stand to that swath of land. A man can swim that distance in an hour on a good day, if the current isn't too strong and the water isn't too cold, if the man is a strong swimmer and isn't prone to panic. Of course, we're told that the only things on the other side of the gray strait that divides us are communists. No markets, no tea shops, no small stands. There's probably nothing left on that shore but artillery, tanks, men who want us dead. I write a letter to you every night, wrap it around a stone, and throw it into the sea. One truth for every lie. Dear Mother, I am well. They are feeding us. Dear Mother, I'm a good shooter and I've learned to fight. I no longer cry easily when I'm bullied. Dear Mother, we're winning the war and we'll be home any day now. Dear Mother, I know you would tell me not to scratch from mosquito bites, but I can't help it. Itch can drive a man insane. Dear Mother, you'd be proud of how brave I am, even when the artillery shell comes. Dear Mother, I'm married now. Don't worry about me dying alone. Dear Mother, from my shore I can see yours, and sometimes I think you might be able to see me waving. My arms are getting stronger. I can feel the ropiness of my tendons when I clench my fists, the hard ball of muscle when I press my arms to my side. The commanders are brutal. They make us toil in this heat, carrying heavy sacks of rice and equipment from one shore to another. They row us out to the middle of the sea, throw us in, and tell us to swim back. If we fail, we squat. If we fail, we run. If we fail, we're berated and reminded of how the communists will slit cartilage from skull when they catch us. Remember our comrades who died 2 years ago fighting for your right to go home, they bark. Think you could protect us the way they did? If the Battle of Guningtou happened today, you punks, we'd all be dead. I don't resist anymore. 4 years, and I've learned not to resist. Instead, I do extra push-ups and pull-ups after drills, run an extra 2 laps when I wake up from my morning sleep. Colonel Lee tells me he's impressed with my progress. He winks and tells me I deserve a promotion. You'll be a KMT officer yet, he says. They tell us it's treasonous to miss home, almost as bad as desertion, which is punishable by death. We are home, they remind us. Jingmen, Matsu, Taiwan. This is still China, and we are still home. It's only a matter of time, they say, until we're reunited with the mainland. It's only a matter of time until we take the mainland back. They said that last year, and the year before that, and the year before that, and the year before that. Last week, Xiaosu, my favorite tea house girl, shook me awake. "You were calling for your mother," she said. "You were yelling." Her face looked weary as she blotted out my tears with a handkerchief. I turned my head away. "Don't be embarrassed," she said. "You're not the first one to miss his mother in his sleep." She lay down on her side, one fist propped under her cheek, as if she had done this hundreds of times before. Stroking my arm, she said, "Tell me about her." I didn't want to. I didn't want to invoke my memory of you, the way you smelled of fish and kumquats, the way your hair was going gray at your temples, the way you hid your teeth behind your hands when you smiled because you were shy about how crooked they were. "Another day," I said, pulling on my pants. "My time here is nearly up. Thank you."
Is this good?
Does that work?
Great. Yeah, we're good. You good?
I think if someone wants to take our seats while we're up here, you can rest your legs.
Are you closer to the wine?
I think I'll just wait for the shuffling to stop before we start.
Somebody should sit there.
Okay, so thank you all so much for being part of this anthology and part of this event. I'm just honored to have your words. So one of the things I wanted to ask you guys is, for me, often when I find something confusing or difficult, I'll write about it, whether that's in fiction or nonfiction. It can be a way of changing my understanding of it or figuring out what I'm really feeling. And so what I wondered was, have you guys has your idea of home ever changed through writing, or does it shift when you shift forms? Yeah. The answer can be no.
I never shift forms, so I only write novels.
Okay, but the first part applies.
I would say my own sense of it has changed pretty dramatically, but I don't know how much of that is about writing and how much of that is just about that. Maybe it's incremental. Maybe it is like everything that I've ever written gradually has turned into this different state of being.
I'm curious
That
about how
makes
it changed.
Oh, I think we traveled so much when I was a kid. I went on my first trans-Pacific flight when I was 9 months old, and we lived in Seoul, and then we lived in Truk, Hawaii, Guam, and then we moved to Maine, which seemed like a mistake after all those places, but which I've come to love. And then I began this life as a visiting writer later on, where I just kind of kept going around to different schools, and gradually I used to tell myself that I didn't really feel at home anywhere, but that I could see after a while that wasn't true, actually, that there were places that I felt like I belonged to and that belonged to me.
I think for me, similarly, I don't know if, I think that my idea of home has definitely changed over the years, but I don't know how much of that has to do with writing. I think maybe my writing has changed because of my evolving ideas of home. And I think even now I'm not sure where home is. And I think maybe writing is sort of a way to sort of write into that. Because like Alex, I moved around a lot, and I think I'm lucky and privileged in some ways to count several places as home, but in a way that means that you never fully belong anywhere, but also that you always leave a part of yourself behind no matter where you go. And I think that a lot of like writing is about wrestling with that and trying to find a place to belong of your own creation, maybe in a way.
I think for me, I was thinking about that. That I feel very at home here in New York. I love New York. I consider New York a home. I consider Manila home. I consider, I think of myself as someone who's just happy or fine wherever I am, because I only choose to live in places that I like. I don't really want to be in places I don't want to be. So, but one thing that I did recognize is that there is a place, and it's really interesting. There is a place that just, when I think about it, when I imagine it, when I'm imagining it again right now, I'm writing about it right now, it's my mom's weird, teeny tiny hometown on a river in a weird little, in an island called Leyte in the middle of the Philippines, which is also nowhere land in the Philippines. And we used to go there in the summer. We were dropped there by my mom, who went off gallivanting. As I said, she's gallivanting. And so in the summer, we just went to her hometown. And this town had no electricity. It was dead by around 5 o'clock when it was already done. You know, the day was done. And, you know, we had kerosene lamps. And the smell of those Petromax lamps. For me, that is weird, but it's terrible to imagine, to think that that is, for me, really a powerful place of home. And I keep writing and writing and writing. I never get it down, but I keep writing about it. It's weird.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add that I feel like all of that really resonates with me. And also, one weird surprise, though, I guess, for me when I started writing was that I think I thought that writing about, and I'm going to use air quotes, identity, or like writing about home or places or placelessness would make me feel more cohesive as a person. Like, I thought it would make me feel more whole. And the surprise was that, you know, it's not necessarily negative, but I do think that it actually made me feel more fractured. But I think that's only because I have maybe through writing like a clearer, you know, I'm sort of facing the fracture that was there to begin with. But I just didn't know that when I set out. I kind of thought, like, what if I just get it out? Like, what if I just write about it, you know? What if I write about China? What if I write about immigration? Maybe that will make me feel healed, you know? And I don't know that that's necessarily what's happening. But I'm kind of okay with it, I guess. Does that make sense?
I'll add something. I don't know if my idea of home has changed through writing as much as my relationship to the unbelonging, in the sense that, like, in my case, I lived basically in one place in the Cul-De-Sac, and it's a great place. And I still know, like, a lot of the people I grew up with, and as I've kind of created a writing life, and some of them have seen some of the things I've written to kind of, like, through those relationships, discover that the not belonging or the not feeling at home created this, like, gift of a different kind of sight that I think writers largely take with us. So, like, anywhere, I mean, I write a lot about place. I feel like it's kind of a through line in a lot of my work. And often I've found that, like, comments I get are kind of like, oh, you were perceiving this with, like, a totally different sensibility. And I think maybe there's always, like, a grief or a sadness or a disorientation, but there is kind of this, like, magical beingness, I think, in being the outsider insider or something. I don't know.
No, I think that makes sense. So I'm going to ask you guys a question that I haven't figured out the answer to for myself, and so I'm hoping wiser heads will help me, which is, we talk about representation and why it's important, and I do think it's very important. And part of that is seeing someone who is like you, or who is like your mom, or who is, you know, in work, and I think that's deeply important. But I also found that there's something about finding people who are adjacent to you. So earlier I mentioned that when I was very lonely and sad, Alex's book meant a lot to me. I'm not Korean in that book, and I'm not a young man growing up in that part of America. Like, it wasn't, I didn't look at that book and go, that person is exactly and identically me, but I saw it and I felt something in me recognized it and bounced off it. And so I guess this is sort of a two-part question, which is, are there books that have done that particularly for you guys? And do you know what I mean when I'm talking about that adjacency thing rather than the, like, that is me?
I mean, like, so much of literature is that, right? Like, especially fiction. I grew up consuming a lot of fiction, and I still consume a lot of fiction, and, you know, most of it is like, thank God I'm not living those people's lives, because a lot of times it's really dramatic, and I don't want to be in that situation. But I think that having yourself recognized in any particular way seems really important. I think for me, what has been like a book that I've read recently that has meant a lot to me is Ken Liu's The Paper Menagerie. It's a collection of short stories, they're speculative short stories, and because they're speculative, they're not my life, but they are grown out of sort of Chinese mythology, a lot of it, which is not my life. It is sort of like my culture, but it's not, you know, I also grew up with American culture, and I think having that sort of, in that way, it was adjacent enough, right? Like, and it was adjacent in a way that I had never seen before. So I'd read so many other things that were adjacent in other ways, where, like, you know, young girl living, you know, having moved around a lot or whatever, you know, those specific things. But I'd never seen that particular thing ever, and I'm almost 36. So that was really magical to me, that I cried when I read it, even though it's not necessarily all like really sad stories, because I felt recognized in a way that all other literature had not, even though so much of literature had given me so much already.
I feel attached to Black Panther. Yeah, go ahead. No, I mean, I don't know.
That's pretty good.
I mean, I'm a woman who named her daughter Nastasia after the heroine in The Idiot by Dostoevsky. So I've always felt, you know, there are so many books that you're so attached to. Filipinos are very, very attached to the Irish, you know. I mean, my education was really in, a lot of it was Irish literature, and I guess because they're Catholic, you know. So that Catholic guilt and horror is all there. And so, you know, all of that. But I do recognize that when I read, it was a very, very boring book until people started putting weird things into people's vaginas. It's the book of the Around the World trip of Magellan by an Italian, Pigafetta. Pigafetta was the scribe. But I was reading, I just read it cover to cover because, of course, Magellan is killed by Filipinos. Yay. So our Wakanda is this island of Mactan, you know, which is near Leyte. But there's a glossary in Pigafetta. And that glossary, I was reading it, and Pigafetta said this is from the island of Mactan, and it turns out it was the very first time I read in a book the words of my own language. Because I grew up learning in English, going to school in English, or learning in the other language of colonization in my town, which is Tagalog, because I'm not Tagalog, I'm Waray. So I saw Waray words for the first time when I was around 24. And it was also a misrecognition because Pigafetta said it was Cebuano, and it was Waray.
I'm thinking of Heinz and Sue Fenkel, Memories of My Ghost Brother, Fei Mianying's Bone, thinking of you know, how my first experience of being an Asian American writer was in classes, and it was that I was alone, and everyone was like, you know, like I felt like in some weird spotlight that that no one else in the class was in. and those were books where I in particular felt, that, Heinz and Finkel's book in particular was like the reverse of my life in a sense, like being half Korean and being in Korea instead of being in the U.S. And that was very peculiar. And so when I finally met him, it was like this incredibly charged moment that he had no idea, like, what it meant to me. Where I was like, "You're like the opposite of me, but also not," And he was like, "It's nice to meet you." Anyway,
this is sort of a weird answer to your question, but I'm thinking of, like, when I hear that question, I'm thinking of Peter Pan, the book and play, whatever, that I'm actually named after. Because, so when I was a kid, I used to go by my Chinese name, which is Xu Wencong, and spelled with a soft C. And so I would go to school and I already like looked weird, and I was in Iowa and I stuck out and there were no other like kids of color. And so this name became this thing that it was just like an extra thing that you could make fun of me for. So at some point my parents were like, let's just choose a name, for you that isn't, people aren't going to pick on. And at the time I was like really into Peter Pan, and I guess adjacency, I'm thinking about it because I felt like I was like having like a life-changing identifying experience with Wendy, because she was this little girl and she was like surrounded by and also having to take care of and deal with all these boys, and there was something there that I was like, I get it, it's hard. But there was something in her character, so like race is not something there that connects us. Certainly I think I was aware from the very beginning that Wendy was like a little white girl. So that wasn't the connection, but there was something about the otherness, that still existed, was like really powerful for me. And so I told my parents that that's what I wanted to go by, and they didn't care. They were like, okay, we don't know any American names, so let's just go with that one. But yeah, I think it's to this day I still think of it as a nice example of how like representation and I think like identification is not always super literal, and it doesn't need to be. Sometimes it's just like one weird little contextual thread that really does something important to you.
So I guess when I think about, like, this is what I'm about to reference is so probably like everyone's favorite book maybe, but like, and wildly different experience-wise, but I referenced it in the Cul-De-Sac piece, and I think maybe because my experience of like outsiderness, and I don't know where this will go in like further writing, had so much like, and not just physically, but like beauty versus ugliness kind of stuff in it. But The Bluest Eye is like an enduring favorite. And just in terms of what I mentioned before, in terms of like disorientation and like the psychological impact of kind of embodying this like border thing. I've been reading a lot of Banu Kapil, who I love, and I don't know if this is class or what, but Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie is always, I love all of her work, and I feel like there's I just have a strong relationship with her writing.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask one more question before asking the audience if they have any questions. And I'm going to ask a question about audience, which is, I feel like there is the idea of, like, there's this white dude writer who just thinks about, I don't know, himself and his best friend when he writes books, but people who are on the outside in some way, which might have to do with class or might have to do with race, there's always this question of, like, who are you writing for? And I'm always very interested in how different writers answer that question. So, who are you writing for?
I mean, for the longest time, I always just think of like the kid that I was, who was like hiding from the like racist white kids by being in the library because they weren't that interested in reading. So Some things are so basic. And and I loved being in there, and would wander around and find these books, and I think of like trying to write something for that kid, the next version of me, who needs that. I think, I was thinking about what you were saying, which I'm really touched by, about your experience of my book, but also like, you're one of the writers I was waiting for, so like.
I'm sorry if I did the Heinz and Zufenkel thing to you. Where it's like, what are you saying?
Anyway.
I would say I think something similar, but I hope that I'm writing for a version of myself when I was like a much younger writer, and then before I was a writer, but a version of myself that got better writing and reading advice than I got. And what I mean by that is that all I remember is getting told that you had to write for that guy, and those guys, and that was it. And so, yeah, I feel like I want to, or I was never told that as a writer you could refuse to translate. You could choose to exclude or prioritize. You could make these like amazing choices. I just wish that somebody had said those things to me earlier, or I guess relevant to, why we're all here. I wish that like when I was in Iowa City and I used to go to Prairie Lights bookstore and like just touch books, that I couldn't afford yet. I wonder what it would have been like if it, instead of like 20 Norton anthologies in a row, which are fine, but if I had come across something like this, would that have been a mirror for me at a much earlier age? And like, would that have done something for me as a reader and an audience member to like see something like that reflected back at me? Like, what could have happened? And I'll never know, but it's exciting to think about that somebody else might have a different experience.
I think for me, this is probably, there's like two answers to this. I think also like, similar to what Wendy said, for a long time, I thought that like I had to write for the default audience, which is the white dude audience. And I think what has transformed that for me a lot is having been involved like with the writers workshop, with like Kundiman, like with Vona, like these like communities of writers who are writers of color, which I had not really known about, I guess, when I was even first starting to write, or I didn't realize that like there's all of these people for whom my writing doesn't only matter, but it interests them in a different way. I think it's not about sort of like letting them into my world and being sort of like the guide into some exotic world, but like actually like participating in this world together. And that has sort of really transformed the way I think about audience. And the other thing that I always keep in mind is I had a friend who once told me when I was having a really hard time, continue to write, she was like, you need to be writing the book that is going to save your life. And so I think about that all the time, because books have saved my life in the past, and you never know who's reading. And so I don't know who that person might be, but I always try to write as if I'm trying to save my own life. And my own writing has saved my life, the act of writing, I would say, but the act of reading as well. So both of those things, I think.
I'll say this, this question has always really puzzled me, because as a person who grew up on an island, I thought every single person was Filipino. Everything is Filipino. Like Elvis is Filipino. Everyone's just Filipino. So Dostoevsky's Filipino. And so I've always had that problem, because the hubris with I grew up with hubris. You grow up in an island, it's just hubris. The world is you. So I never had the problem of wondering about my audience. So I actually had that problem. People keep asking me this question. And so I always think about the fact that I just dive into books, you know. I read Proust for 20 years. I loved it. You know, I was just in this world of weirdo French people whom I hated. I absolutely hated every single one. But I love the book. And I didn't feel like Proust. Please explain the Dreyfus affair to me. You know, I didn't have this thing where I didn't feel the need to be, I guess I didn't feel too much mediation. So audiences, for me, just go ahead and goddamn dive into my goddamn book. That's what I think. Like, I don't care. So that is audience for me. Goddamn, just read the book. Book them all.
Can we make a poster of that? I need that in my house. I want a poster of that quote, in my house to look at.
I'm tired of that. I mean, just read the books.
So I think we have time for some questions? Okay. So does anybody have any questions to ask these wonderful people? There are a lot of you. You can't all be shy.
Thank you for sharing your work and inspiring us all. And my question is from the foreword that Viet Thanh Nguyen wrote about leaving home to find home and become a writer. Is that part of what your journey as a writer was? You felt like you had to leave home? Or imagining your hometown, if you never left and you ended up in the attic or in the basement and mom and dad were still making meatloaf, would you have become a writer? Or is it, everyone sort of touched on this, but I'm wondering that experience.
I actually wrote part of my second novel in my mom's basement. Because I had spent all of my grant money like a drunk sailor. She was really... She was really kind about it. I paid her back. So if you end up in your mom's basement, you can still be a writer. Just saying. Might even put a little pressure on you to get out of there. I think I definitely, when I left Maine at the age of 18, though, I did have this feeling like I had to get as far away from that state as possible. And first I got to Connecticut, not far enough, and then I went to San Francisco. And that sort of started to do something. I think it meant a lot to me to finally be out there and be around organizations like the Gay Asian Pacific Alliance, which back then had this newsletter, the Lavender Godzilla, which was, the name, I used to make fun of the name, but it saved my life that it existed. I was a snarky 22-year-old, what are you gonna do? So there's like a mix of that, I guess. I think that what might surprise you is that there's no one experience, there's no stable experience of it in my experience. That you'll always be surprised by when you have to leave home and always be surprised by when you have to go back.
That's an amazing sentence. It's just good. It's really good.
You must be a writer.
Maybe I'll just add that I immigrated here when I was a baby, so I didn't make that choice. But I think it's really important maybe to acknowledge that, I do think for the generation of Chinese immigrants that my parents belonged to, I think so many of them had definitely felt like they had to leave home to be able to have the kind of family and life where when at some point their kid, me, was like, I don't want to do anything practical. I have something inside me. I want to write, I want to do this thing. I want to be a poet, that they could not freak out and accept me for that and support me. I think that I don't know if that would have, I don't know if they feel that would have been possible if they wouldn't have made that decision.
So 3 years ago, I moved to Taiwan. And my mom was like, your grandma would find this really weird. She worked really hard to get out of Taiwan. And like, you're going back? Like, she's like, what are you doing? I think I would have been a writer no matter what, I think. But I think going back in some ways has changed the way I write and the way I think and the way that I understand myself. And I don't think that I would have been able to have that experience without sort of leaving my known world of America. You know, I was born in America, I'm 100% American. Like, you know, I've always sort of just felt that way about it. And I think leaving has allowed me to sort of gain sort of perspective on the multitudes of who I am in a way that I could not have been able to examine it sort of mired here in my life, which is very comfortable. And I don't need to push myself to sort of interrogate certain aspects of my own identity and what I believe in. So I think that my writing has definitely changed because of that, and I've become a better writer and hopefully human for it.
I have a similar story, I guess, in the sense that, again, lived in the Cul-De-Sac for the whole time. And at like 28 years old, I went and lived in India for a few years. And I actually didn't really start writing until, like mid to late 20s, after like many years of my parents trying to beat it out of me. And I think, you know, at the same time, I had also gone through a pretty significant death in the family, or significant to me, the loss was. And I think of it as like just the experience of loss in general that informs the writerly experience of home. Or like for me, I think I had always had that sense of like just not fitting anywhere, and that was just going to be a part of my existence. But kind of coming to terms more with a different kind of loss, while also living in India and kind of processing, maybe not even then, but just like in the time since then, the reality of like just forever writing into this absence, or this space of loss, or this desire to seek something. I don't know.
Well, for me, I think the great thing about leaving home was not going to church anymore. I think writing was extra, but not having to do do the novenas, do the rosaries, and so I had nothing else to do, so I started writing, I guess. It freed up a lot of my time. My God, Wednesday to the Holy Mary, and then Thursday to the Saints of Impossible Causes. My God, and so that was good. That was good.
I mean, I think the tiny thing I'd add to that is one of the things in here is the idea of multiple homes. And so I grew up in the UK, but this anthology basically happened because I was living with my grandma on the Upper West Side of New York. I couldn't have done the Margins Fellowship if she hadn't been like, oh yeah, come live with me. And she was born in Shanghai, and she's an amazing lady who gave me many rotisserie chickens in order to survive. She was very concerned I was going to die and that the rotisserie chicken would keep me alive. And being with her, she's of a generation where on some level she's like, what are you complaining about? You have food and TV. And hearing her stories, which she only tells me sideways, I don't know, it made a new home for me. So I didn't feel like I left home. I felt like I moved homes when I was making this.
I do think that's true. I do think that the reason why I write is because I can always go home. You know, I know that there's a home for me. So I do think that that's a huge gift that I have, that there's always a place. But you have to go to church.
Yes. So do we have any other questions?
So my question is about community. It seems like all of you kind of have multiple communities, like you're from them and you're parts of them. But a lot of times I've found that Asian and Asian American communities can kind of have this in-group, out-group mentality and even be really intensely private. And so I'm kind of wondering how your writing has affected your relationships with your community, whether it's kind of brought you closer or you ever sort of feel a kind of pressure to represent that community in a certain way.
So I would say that before I joined communities, I felt more pressure. I think that I had this imagined idea of like what I'm supposed to write as an Asian American, both from like the outside of like, what are white people gonna think? Like, am I supposed to write about like identity and race? And like also like what I imagined like the community expected of me, like a burden to like write a certain kind of story that was representational and like didn't say anything bad or like whatever it was. And it was only actually by joining the communities that I realized like none of that was true or that it didn't matter, because you suddenly understand that like anywhere else, there's like a multiplicity of stories and that everyone has a unique story, and what everyone wants is to sort of like have that diversity of stories represented out in the world. So I would say, I mean, anyone who knows me knows this, like, community is everything to me. It has made my life as a writer infinitely better, and I don't think that I would still be writing if it were not for community. I think that the pressures are sort of these imagined things that we put upon ourselves that in some ways is very unfair because like a white, straight male writer is probably never thinking about those burdens. But we do, and I think the only way to sort of realize that it's false is by remaking the box, not by sort of conforming to a box, but like making the box of your own choosing, or have no boxes actually at all.
I was going to say, being a part of, so I started my career as a part of like gay writers communities, queer writers communities, Asian American ones, and at some point someone was like, "What is that like?" And I was like, "It's sort of like they throw you the parade before you win the ball game instead of after." So like, because I just felt this kind of amazing ability to like meet other writers and participate in everything from like open mics to anthologies. You know, the Asian American Writers Workshop did an early queer anthology, Takeout, for example. That was great to be in and great to like understand myself in the context of this group of writers. You know, it's true that I'm the first openly gay Korean American author of fiction. I'm also still the only one, which is not appropriate. So if you have any queer Korean American friends who are writing, just tell them to like hustle it up, because I don't have I don't have like a lot of time left to greet them at the gate. But I've been also creating fellowships to try and support that. Like, I just created one at the at Lambda in the memory of Justin Chin, for example. That's a new one, and I hope to expand opportunities like that.
I think one of the worst things, right, that like white supremacy does to us is it makes like us as writers of color or Asian American writers feel like there's only so many spots or slots, you know, like we all have to share one pie, and like when the pie is gone, you just starve, you know, because there's no more pie. And I think, you know, I don't know if like Jonathan Franzen feels that kind of scarcity, you know. I don't know if he thinks about that stuff at night, but I do, and like we do. And so, yeah, I think it's really amazing, especially like spaces like this where we I don't know, we create opportunities for each other, or like we walk through a door and then we turn around and we help like a couple people come in after we like hold the door open, you know. It's really amazing. I guess that's, yeah, I've had a very similar experience.
I'll just add to that and say, yeah, that like I don't think I would be writing without community. Like this space, and just, you know, the people that I've met through other like writing groups have just been so encouraging, and I don't think it's been my experience at all that like I think, yeah, the system tries to feed us this idea that there are only so many spaces, which is just like not true at all. And yeah, I think I would just say that I've first and foremost always been just like the bad Indian, and meeting the other bad Indians who are writers. I think like the Indians who are writers are inherently the bad Indians. Has just been such a joy, and I feel really lucky for that. And like you said, Wendy, I hope to keep the door open.
I think it's really hard to be in a space like Asian American Writers Workshop and not recognize that community is so beautiful, and it really does feed you. Asian American writers, Kundiman, all of these places, I look for them, and I find that that you want to be in those places where with the people that you want to be. You choose those places, and I think it's really important that we have that mindset that we choose our places. So and these places are so welcoming and are so beautiful to be in that it's a very rich gift for us as writers to be in these spaces. So thank you.
Yes, thank you to the Asian American Writers Workshop and to Ken in particular.
Yeah. Can I just add a tiny thing to that, which is I wasn't sure I was allowed to apply to the Margins Fellowship, which it changed my life, and I'm mixed, and I didn't know if mixed counted, and I was talking to my friend, she was like, well, they'll decide if mixed doesn't count. You apply and see what happens. And I think when I was on like the short list, I didn't even know I'd gotten it, and one part of my excitement was just like, I count. And I think I felt that here. I'm crying. Sorry, it's been an emotional day. Since I've arrived, and I think that is something that is wonderful, and we wanted to make part of the anthology to go, yes, we'll have lots of different stories and hope that it encourages more stories.
Which is not to say that there aren't divisions, you know, because I think with, let's say, Filipino and Filipino Americans, often you'll find those things. But the whole point is just don't bother. You know, just don't bother with the dividing, you know, just goddamn, you know, yeah, so. But there are divisions, but I think the whole point is you need to really recognize you make your choices, you put yourself forth for the Margins Fellowships, you know, you kind of recognize the community that you want to be in and go for that community.
Anyone else? I see a hand.
Thoughts of internalized racism ever crossed your mind through your day-to-day life or through your writing? And I wonder, like, how have you overcome that? And have you ever seen others go through that as well? And has that inspired you in your writing?
So there was like a brief period of time when I wished that I had a white last name, because then I would be able to sell books without anyone knowing I was Asian. And it was like, it's funny because I grew up with like, all my closest friends were always Asian. I grew up with like, you know, like through high school, college, like everything. So it wasn't like my day-to-day life, I think, that I struggled with so much. It was publishing, and like the knowledge that I would be perceived a certain way by the industry. So I don't know if that counts as internalized racism, but I think I sort of, now when I look back upon it, it's ridiculous to me and upsetting to me that I felt that way, but I also understand why I felt that way. I think that it's sort of what I just said about, community, but like the only sort of way to overcome that is sort of redraw the boundaries of what you think you're capable of and like who you get to be, and not letting that be determined from outside, but from within, But of course, like, we all grew up in this culture with the media telling us certain things and like falling back upon easy stereotypes. And I think that is normal, but then also like a thing that you just have to check yourself against over time, I guess.
I see it a lot in my writing classes. I'm pretty sure it's like, it's just incredibly common. I'll have, lately especially, I have like more diverse classes than I've ever had. And the first stories I get, all the characters are white. And then I have to have a series of conferences with them where I'm like, is this what you really want to write? And just sort of like try to like go in through a certain amount of kindness to get them, to coach them into writing more complex stories that don't center whiteness, basically. It's just a kind of, it's amazing how much we're all conditioned to make sure that the white person is not angry, that the white person feels taken care of, that the white person is accommodated. And I see it most often in the beginning fiction writing classes that I teach, and that's where I work the hardest with students at getting them to renegotiate that idea of themselves and the world, and to center their stories. And I do it because I did it myself, and I remember feeling like my own background was too complicated to explain in a story, because every time I would talk to people about my background, they'd be like, so what are you? Or the polite version was, how did your parents meet? Which I realized that not everybody's asked that question. And that question kind of made me into a writer, but it also, because answering it, I had to tell a story over and over again. The story of my parents meeting was a great story. And so I was happy to tell it, and it took me a long time to realize that the context was always a racist context.
I'll just say that I think that like internalized racism is like, we're always battling it, and like everybody, and like me in particular, I may have stopped wanting to have a white or European name many years ago, but like it's just so insidious. And I was having conversations over the past few days at AWP, just even now, it can be as simple as feeling like I'm with a group of other mostly white people that I'm in an MFA program with, and as we're discussing like what events we're going to go to, and they want to do something and I want to do something else, that I still have this like weird sense that somehow my ideas of what's interesting are wrong. And like that's also my internalized racism, is that like because this other white person thinks some event or some panel or some writer is interesting and I don't know them or I don't care, that means that like my brain is deficient, and having to check myself and be like, that's wrong, like that's just not true. And that is a throwback from my childhood, but that it's not just our childhood, it's everywhere, like every day. And so yeah, I think it's a forever process of undoing that.
Similar for me. I mean, it's an ongoing life process and an ongoing like writing process. And I grew up in like a almost all white suburb in Iowa, and there were like always like Chinese families and friends coming around the house. My parents did like a great job of like finding the few other Asian people in town, and we're like, "You're coming over. We're gonna eat Chinese food," you know. But you know, I went to like an all-white high school, and I like didn't have. I only had white friends, and so sometimes, yeah, like I have those days where I don't, you know, I'm like, do I really like that? Like, how did my interest become my interest, and like how did my like value systems become my value systems? And now as like a poet who's been like writing, you know, working on fiction for the last like 2 years, I run into this when I'm trying to tell those stories from my Chinese American childhood, which took place where it took place, and I'm struggling with like, you know, facing like what my inclinations are in terms of like how am I going to represent this character, right? This is like an auntie character. How am I going to represent this this family friend, this family member, and like, you know, why do I reach for like these? Why am I reaching for this language that doesn't feel fresh? It feels stock. You know, why am I reaching for this visual? It's making, you know, the process that is already, of course, like challenging, even more challenging. But you know, I think it feels important, at least at the moment, for me to have to work through it.
I'll say this. I know that yeah, I'm. As you can imagine, I'm not really that. I mean, the internalized. I don't really feel it. But externalized hatred, I actually have a huge problem with. Like I'm so angry with white people. It's just too much sometimes. You know that calling my colleagues racist is not good. So that is actually my problem. You know, how to deal with the anger that you have, and to put it in a place that really makes sense in the world that you're living in. Because I might have internalized, who knows, I probably do, but I have anger, you know, and so what I do is what I've decided to do in my work is to really look at history. History, telling the history of this country, and I keep, at this point, I'm so obsessed with the Filipino American War, because that war is pivotal to this country's sense of self. It is a war in which all these white people who are, you know, making us, okay, I'll include myself, internalize whatever, have destroyed the homes of others. This country has destroyed the homes of others. This country has made all of these many different people not be able to go home. And when we give this country that mirror, when we give Americans, and I include myself among these Americans because I am an American citizen, when we give the country that mirror, the mirror of their history, let them internalize something. Let them internalize the horror of their history and of their home. That is what I feel. Sorry, I got angry.
It was brilliant. Is there a hand up? Okay, one more. This is the last question, so like shoot your hand up fast. If you have. No, we can all socialize. Oh, okay.
So I've been thinking about this a lot after seeing Black Panther and what it means for the Asian diaspora if we ever to have our own Wakanda, what that would look like. And I would love to hear your thoughts on your Wakanda.
I've been thinking about that a lot because what really moved me about Wakanda is that my theme is colonization, and my work is all about the post-colonial. And what I found very, 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 very difficult to deal with in my work, and it is a criable part of thinking about the post-colonial, is that it is absolutely impossible in some ways to visualize Wakanda for me, because there's no point in time in the history that I'm looking at where one can see that Filipino. that Filipino has been obliterated. And what I found so beautiful about Wakanda is that it created that space of the unimaginable and the impossible. So I'm just going with Black Panther. I'm still, I still haven't seen that for the Filipino. I'll just take Wakanda as my adjacent place.
I haven't. I was just gonna say I've tried to see Black Panther 3 times, and every time I go there, and I'm like, it's fine. I'm totally gonna be able to go this time, and then it's always sold out. So I'm like,
one point for you, Fandango.
I know, because I have that movie app, and I'm like insistent that I want to use my app. Oh, yeah. Do we know about this app? But so you can't buy tickets in advance. Anyway, all to say that I'm not sure I'll have an answer after I finally get to. I don't want to guess at this thing that I haven't seen it yet.
I have also not seen it. But I'll say, is that funny? I don't know. That in relation to the adjacent comment, I think that like maybe this is where solidarity comes in. Like if there is some kind of dream possibility of a Wakanda world, like I think it creates that automatically, I think, for all other oppressed and marginalized communities. I don't know what the vision of that is, but I feel that that's true.
Does anybody remember a video game called Jade Empire? Yeah. One soul. I'm gonna high five you so hard after this. Anyway, I have seen Black Panther twice. I took my students. It was very interesting. Some of them had never read comics, actually. They were like, were comics a big deal when you were young, Professor Chee? And I was horrified. Just another, the horrors of aging are just endless, and it's impossible to anticipate them. But anyway, Jade Empire, for all of you who have not played it, and you might want to, I don't know, after this, I'll try to sell it to you. But basically, what I loved about it was that it was a kind of steampunk fantasy game, and you could play this range of characters, all of them Asian. There were no white choices that I remember. The only white characters in the game were villains. Sorry, white people in the audience. Don't say so. Thank you. And they were very, very rare. They appeared in only a few of the cutscenes, and you just had these adventures in this Pan-Asian landscape with multiple fighting styles, and you go off at one point to the realm of the fox demons, and it just was this amazing game. And I don't think no one has extended it in a long time, which makes me sad. But which is probably why only one of you in this room has played it. But anyway, highly recommended. I played it on Xbox. But it gave me an idea for a fantasy for not even just like a single country, but like a whole world where that had happened, and for a fantasy space for that world. And I'm grateful to it for that, because it was one of those things that kind of, I played it so much, and I was in my 30s, and people were like, you play Xbox a lot. But I just wanted to be in this game, so it was, maybe someday I'll find a way to write about it. I should probably try to write about it. Anyway. Jade Empire.
Thank you for being here. And yes. Oh, wait. Did we have more answers? No.
I haven't seen it yet because it wasn't playing in Taiwan when I left, and I just got here. So yeah.
Every single thing.
I know. Everyone has seen it.
Anyway, thank you all so much for being here. I believe you can buy a book around the corner. But yes, thank you.